Hello everyone and welcome to Handmade Hero, show where we code a complete game live on stream. We really are, I mean, this is the classic case of we left ourselves with a giant code bomb and now we just have to defuse it. Basically last weekend we made importing wave files, we integrated the code for importing and segmenting wave files. We took that from our original asset packing test code and we welded it into the game so that now like the running game can just live import sound. We did all of that work, and it was a fair bit of stuff we had to merge, but again, you know, it was code we'd already written, so we didn't really have to invent anything. It was just a porting issue, really. So we did that work, but we didn't have time to actually do anything with it. So we did all the porting, and literally, I don't think we've ever even run the code. So what we need to do today is get started down the road towards actually finaling that code and making it so that it imports wave files properly and allows us to actually, you know, use them in the game. So we got two steps to that. Step one involves no really new code, I don't think. It's just actually going through and getting the code we wrote working from last weekend. That's just going through and making sure the wave files appear to import the actual sample data correctly and store it into the HHA files. This involves reading one of those tag files, parsing the wave file directive, looking at the tags, applying those tags to an asset structure, and then having that asset structure point to the actual sample data, right? And in order to do that, so that there's a lot of things that we haven't really addressed in there, but in order to do that, I think the only thing we may not have written yet is how the channel labeling works at the moment. And so we kind of have to look at that. I think we have to expand the grid notion to actually have those things labeled properly. We have to actually prepare a grid that would have that in there. And I think we made room for that, but we never actually made the grid, something along these lines. So we have to write a little bit of new code to create that grid, but other than that, we wrote all the code and it probably just needs to be debugged. The second step, which we probably won't do today, because that probably what we'll do today is the first part. The second step, which we'll do next weekend, is to streamline the asset system and make it so that it actually works with page sounds correctly now, because we sort of changed up how we wanted to do that. And so just re-implementing that sound streaming code into its final form would be the last step of that process, so that then we have sounds in the game fairly solid. We can just move on from there. We already did that sort of with textures. We took kind of the old school way that we were doing it and we rewrote it to be sort of a more efficient system. There's a little bit of jank in the system, namely that we don't really do any kind of runtime packing of textures if they're tiny, and that's arguably something we probably should have been doing. But other than that, we did a pretty good job. Like, we do what we're supposed to do, which is we keep a bank of textures and we just swap them in as necessary, and that should keep things running pretty smoothly. But for sound, we did not do the new version, right? And so what we want to do is make a fixed block system exactly like the textures. Basically, we'll just allocate a bunch of bins of a certain size, and then every time we page in a sound, we just page it into one of those bins. Or we can use the kind of more avant-garde, ridiculous system. It's probably one of the weirdest ideas that I've had. I don't really know what I think about it, but I described it on a previous stream, and it was essentially to treat sound as a giant streaming buffer. And what you do every time you play a sound is you move it from the inactive region to the front if it's not in the active region at the time. This is a really weird system. I've never heard of anything like it. It's probably dumb, but we could certainly try it because, you know, sometimes trying dumb ideas lead to good ideas. It's pretty hard to say. Entropy is the mother of all inventions, you might say. I guess it's usually say necessity is the mother of invention. I would say that entropy is the mother of invention, and necessity is just the thing that filters those inventions by which ones you want at a particular time. Neither here nor there. Yeah. Entropy is the mother of invention is almost certainly the correct statement. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get started on that. We have a pretty clear road to go down here, so there's no sense in belaboring the situation. Let me try and get this out of the way. There we go. I'm having cable issues. I always have cable issues on Handmade Hero. There's way too many machines and things here. It's not preferable. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and open up, excuse me, the editor here. And I'm going to switch to Handmade Hero and build. And then we're going to jump into the debugger. I think what I may do... Oh, right. We're not using this debugger anymore because it crapped out on us. So we're going to be using Remedy. Also, you know, I think we're one behind. So I may want to update. Yeah, we are. So there's a 2.0 version of Remedy that's available. I probably should switch to that. It's got some pretty important additions made to it. So, yeah, that's one of those things that, yeah. Well, I didn't plan for that, and I don't have a thumb drive handy, which is an issue, if I'm being honest. Let me see if I can find one. Hold on a second. We'll take a look in the into the magical backpack here and hope that I have a thumb drive that I can use to transfer the file, because I'm not logged into to the itch.io, to my itch.io account, which is where you get Remedy from. So let's take a look here if I've got one in here. I hope I do. There's a lot of stuff in this ridiculous backpack here, and I never really know what's still hanging around in there. Got some business cards, that's always good. We've got a pen-like thing that has a screwdriver in it for accessing like laptops, I think. We've got, I don't even know what that is, some kind of audio cable. This is like a treasure trove in here. We've got okay, there's a power bar in there. I don't want to know how long that's been in there. That's probably not great, if we're honest about it. Okay, so there's a package of Black Forest gummy bears. That's always good. Yep, not what I was expecting. That's fine. There's a mouse. And then we've got, what have we got in here? Let's take a look. I thought there was a thumb drive in here, but I'm having trouble. There's a USB hub that's in there. There's a earplugs. Got that in there. So there's just, you know, there's some screen cleaning wipes. Okay, so there's an entire keyboard in there. So that's good. Got an entire keyboard. We have a huge set of cabling. We have a microphone. This backpack is a little bit ridiculous at this point. I don't even know why most of the stuff is in there. I think probably because when I went to 4Coder Jam, I think I probably left. I never, it looks to me like I never actually unpacked this backpack. And so everything that was taken to Allen's for 4Coder Jam is still in the backpack, is basically what happened. All right, so last chance for us to find, okay, we have replacement pen ink. So that's good. We've got a car stereo to head, like a, you know, like a cell phone to car stereo connector. So that's, you know, for road trips and stuff. We got 2 pens, which actually would go with those pen inks. We've got a flat folded Ethernet cable. So that's pretty good, right? You can just kind of like keep, that's in there. That's probably good to keep in there, huh? In case you need it for something when you're trying to plug stuff in. And let's see, what's this here? I feel something that feels like it could be possibly USB. I'm not sure. Let me see. Okay, all that's in there. Yeah. Man, that was disappointing. I don't see an actual USB drive in there anywhere. So I think I'm going to have to go get one from another room. How disappointing is that? Like, I literally don't see a single USB drive in this entire thing. Well, folks, you'll have to excuse me for one moment because I just don't see any USB drive here. It must be in the other room, probably because I installed Remedy version 2 on my other machine, on my dev machine, and I needed to get it over there. So I probably brought the thumb drive that's normally here. I'll be right back. At least we got the backpack unpacked. That probably needed to happen, if we're being honest with ourselves. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to this machine and copy the Remedy 2. Or, well, actually, I guess I don't know what the latest one is. Because maybe there might even be another one that I haven't downloaded yet. But let's take a look what we got here. Oh, yeah, there is. So there's a 2... So Remedy for some reason has like the most version numbers of anything since Windows. Windows was a four digit version identifier as well. So this is Remedy 0.2.0.1. And I'm not sure what that necessarily, like why there are that many actual labels in there. I'm not sure what that could possibly be referring to, but you know, I guess we'll have to ask George why there are so many, and he can tell us. I don't know if X13 Pixels is on there. There he is. So he can tell us why there are so many. I don't know, but he must know because he invented it. So, all right, all I'm doing here is I'm just updating to the new Remedy. There were a lot of pretty important changes in this version. That like I'm was really happy about, so I really don't want to use it without these, so I thought it was worth going to get it. So I'm just going to copy the new version into our Remedy directory here. Place. And if you yourself want to get this debugger, if you're sick of Visual Studio, or if Visual Studio just stopped working like mine did, you can actually go to itch.io and get it. It's Remedy. Well, actually, just completed for me. It's remedybg.itch.io. You can click on this little guy right here, and you can buy it. And it's like, I don't know, 1/100th of the price of Visual Studio, something like that. I don't remember what the price is. It's like $1,000 or $2,000 for the full version. I don't even want to know what it is. You can probably get one for only 10 times that much, I'm guessing, Visual Studio. I don't remember. I bought a version of Professional for Molly, and it was like absurdly expensive for such a piece of junk. So this is a bargain price, in my opinion. Probably the best $20 you'll ever spend on a piece of development software that's basically free in the realm of development software. And yeah, it's pretty close to completely replacing Visual Studio. There's not a lot left that doesn't work. So anyway, in here we have now upgraded to 2.01. So that's just I feel like that's probably something we want to do before doing any serious debugging, because there were some pretty big improvements to it that were made, including better expression parsing in the watch window, and handling of there was some problems with inspecting things that were passed to a function by value that were compounds. So like if you pass a struct, it was having trouble with that, and that got fixed, which is a pretty big one for me, because I will often pass or return structs, and so being able to inspect those is pretty important for me. So that was a big one as well. Okay, so if we start down this route, now that we've got our debugger updated, if we go into the import layer here, and we just look at what was supposed to be happening, we could get an idea of what we want to start looking at. What you can see is that basically the code's going to execute exactly the same as it did for bitmaps. There's really not a lot of difference there. But then what's going to happen is we've sort of set a little booby trap up so that if we saw a sound, instead of doing the normal PNG parsing that you would do, we're going to do a wave parse instead. So we kept the code path basically exactly the same. We did not duplicate it at all. We run exactly the same code path. And then all we do is we have a few places in it where we sort of switch out what we're doing. If it turned out that we were parsing a sound, we either turn some things off or turn some things on that we would normally need. So in here, we would expect to go down the process audio import path. Up here, we would expect to go in the parse wave path, or parse wav as I like to call it. Now, that's really most of it. The rest of this stuff, like there's a few things like, well, hey, if you try to put an alignment point on a wave directive, we would tell you no. But most of the other things will execute as before. The one thing that we didn't do, if I remember correctly, is when we come through here and you see us like find something that is a sound or is music, what we would normally do in the case of a piece of artwork is we call this parse pieces function, and what that was designed to do is that was designed to say, what is the actual thing being parsed here? Like ground cover or, you know, a head or a body, image, items, a plate. Figure out what we're actually parsing. And then what it would do is it would build this grid worth of tags because we import like different pieces of the PNG as different assets with different tags on them, right? So the problem that we have here is we need to do the same thing for sound, but we never actually did it, right? So when we actually find a sound file that we want to update, this audio channel tags grid needs to match up with how we're actually splitting those channels out. Now, if you go and look at how we were parsing those, I guess it would probably be an import, process audio import, I think, which is right here. You can see us look at what the max channel count is, and it's the size of that grid. And when we go through and import these, you can see that for every channel that we were going to import, we assign that to so what I'm looking for. We assign that to subsequent entries in that asset grid. So if we want them to be tagged properly on export, what we need to have is that, you know, we already sort of set ourselves up for this. We put it right here. But this to do is the part I'm talking about. What we need is that audio channel tags grid at the start of importing has to be created to contain on each individual entry a single tag, which is just that says channel 0, channel 1, channel 2, channel 3, right? That is what we need to have happen. And so in some sense, this ends up exactly mirroring the grid import for art. The only difference is instead of us having lots of different ways that the sound can get tagged depending on what the directive is. In our case, the sounds have only one directive, which is just the WAV directive. Or sorry, they only have one way of importing, regardless of the directive, because there's a sound directive and a music directive. We don't really do anything differently. Regardless of which one it is, there's only one thing that happens. They end up with a grid that just says for every channel, use a channel tag that says which channel it was. And that's all we do, right? Now you could imagine in the future us doing something fancier. I mean, we could do something fancier here, right? So we could have a bunch of different ways that we create sounds where the different channels mean different things, and then you use a directive that says which tag grid to apply when it comes in. We absolutely could do that. We just don't have a reason to do that, right? There's no, you know, there's no point. We don't have to do that for any particular reason. So for our purposes, we are just going to do the simple thing, but it's worth noting that if we wanted to really mirror that process and we actually had some argument for why we would need to split sounds into different channels that got tagged completely differently rather than just got tagged with their channel index. We absolutely have the code path for it. So should we find that that needs to happen in the future, we can trivially do it. At the moment, we really don't need to, so we just won't. But that's where we're at. So in here with synchronize asset file changes, I'm going to do it at the top here, but we could actually do this a little bit more proactively. We can see that happen maybe a little bit later. This import grid tags here is right on the context. So right here, what we could do is initialize it. What I'm going to do is something like create audio channel tag array or something, or tag grid. And not to be confused with Hagrid, which is from Harry Potter. This is tag grid, which is slightly different, although no less large and imposing. So on the HHT context, we've got this audio channel tags. I'm just going to say, look, we need a function that's going to initialize those audio channel tags. Now, one of the things that I think we might also want to look at just while we're doing this, because, I mean, we are sort of trying to get this asset processing to be sort of streamlined, is it's worth noting now, too, that one of the things that we don't really need to do anymore but still do, if you take a look here at what's happening inside this parse pieces call. So what we used to do, and the reason we used to do it is totally reasonable. The reason we used to do it this way, what we're doing inside parse pieces is we build a tag array anew every time we go to parse a particular thing, like blocks or head, right? We create these sort of tag arrays. What you'll notice is they're all the same now. Now, why do we do this if they're all the same? Why don't we just make a grids ahead of time? Because what we used to do is we used to have welded into this import process appending the tags from the actual tag markup for that particular file or that particular import. We're not doing that anymore. So if you look at what happens in this process, we actually don't need to build different tag arrays for each of these, right? None of that has to happen. It's all totally rote, and we just know ahead of time what it actually is. So we can avoid going through and doing this on every import of every asset by just creating them ahead of time exactly like we do with the audio channel tag grid. Again, tag grid, not Hagrid. Very important programming concept. They don't often teach that in CS classes. I wish they would. You know, a lot of people are currently graduating with a degree in CS from even reputable institutions, and they still think that a tag grid and Hagrid are the same thing. And it's, you know, it really creates problems when you take junior programmers and you try to throw them into a production environment, and all of a sudden they're, you know, you tell them that you need to make a tag grid for something, and you end up with this like sort of burly groundskeeper. Or you tell them that they need to get Hagrid for something because, you know, maybe it's magical or whatever, and you end up with this two-dimensional list of asset tags, right? And in neither case are those things missable. They're not fungible. You can't use one instead of the other. And so I really want to just highlight how important it is to make sure you know which one of those ones you're dealing with. And you know, yeah, it may not show up on a job interview, but it's going to cause you a lot of problems when you actually go to do production work at a real company. So in here with parse pieces, what I'm advocating is I think we should just go ahead and break this out so that when we do these imports here, what we could do is just use the context structure that we could easily pass, you know, down to parse pieces. We could just have all of those tag grids just created at the head end. Into the context structure itself, and then it would just provide back a pointer. It'd be like, here's the one to use as you go forward, and that would be that. So if you take a look at how the tag system is working inside the actual call out, where we call parse pieces to begin with, and I can actually jump up there. So here's parse pieces. Inside parse top level block here, when we go down through parse pieces, you can see the import grid tag structure here. If we look at how that's actually getting used, so if we come down through there, oops, that's not what I want to do. Let's look at it this way. If you look at how this is working, you can kind of see that in here well, my head's in the way. I'm trying to show you. There it is. You can see that all we do is just treat it as a pass-through, right? It's all that's happening is it's getting passed through here. So I think we can just call this something like template tags or whatever. And then what we can do is just treat it as a pointer. So we can just say, all right, we've got a set of templates here. We know that we're going to pull out something like it. So when we come through this template tags, we're going to say, okay, in this case, the template tags is always this. We don't have to really look at any more information than that. In the case where we've got something where we're not sure exactly what it's going to be, let's take a look at that parse pieces and see to what extent we even really need to do it. It looks in here, right, I mean, just looking at it, it looks like we could just insert this particular sort of token check, serial token check. It looks like we could just do that rather directly. And so, in fact, we don't even really need it to be internal here because it's only really setting that template tags part. I think what we could probably do is change the way that we're looking at this stuff here and kind of put that in. So, we're looking at is default, right? At the head end here, we could make this part just do this checking, right? So this part where we actually do the check, we don't really need to call out to this function anymore, I don't think. I think what we can do is just do that right in line and make that a lot clearer about what's going on. So when we come through here, you can see that the block token is the thing that we actually want to check. And so when we come through here and we see that, this part right here would normally be building out those tags. We're going to let that happen, again, ahead of time. And so the import type that we would normally be looking at there, again, so that's these are the two things right here that we're really filling out. Again, they don't even depend on anything else, so it's a really good indication that we don't need to bundle those productions together either. So if we get rid of this stuff, we can just say, all right, let's check the block token. We'll see what it is. We don't need to do any of this stuff. So instead what we're going to do is pretend that we already had this template built. And so the template tags are just going to be something off of the context. So if we imagine this context just had all of this stuff on it, right? So we have the import grid tags, the audio channel tags. We've got the block tags. Maybe something like this. I don't know. Something like this. So we just have a ton of these, different blocks we can have. So that'd be like head, that'd be body, right? You can look down here, character. We've got cover and hand. And then we've got item, obstacles, plate. And, I don't know exactly where we want these to come from or exactly how, maybe we want those to be pointers or, who knows what. But essentially, regardless of how we, choose to do that, we want something along the lines of, okay, we've got art block tags here are the tags that you're going to apply. In the case where you end up seeing the head token, again, none of this matters. And so we just want to, again, get the art head tags, right? And so all we're doing is we're just keeping this result here actually needs to change to import type, right, as well. Again, we're just calling it something else. And so all we need to do here is just systematically replace these with an assumption that we already built them, because since they don't actually depend anymore on the individual thing we're importing, there's no reason not to. So I'm just deleting all of these things. Goodbye. And we'll keep that parse pieces function. We'll call it something else, but effectively we'll keep it and we'll just call it once at startup. And that'll be much more efficient because then we're not constantly creating these ridiculous tag arrays all the time for no reason, right? Because before that's what we were doing. So in this case, yeah. In this case, we don't really know what this stuff is yet. I don't know, do we actually, inside the HHTs, do we actually have those yet. I don't know if we do or not. If we look inside the base game HHT, so these things are all commented out. So I'm going to feel free to just go ahead and say, well, it was a multi-tile import. We know that that's what it will be, even though, you know, we haven't actually done the template tags for it yet. That's what it will be later, so we can put the to-do down in the thing where we actually create those and not up here. So that'll be fine. Import type. Oops. And so that's about it. Although I do want to weld the other, oops, didn't do that. Template tags, content art obstacles, and the last one, plates. So this just lets us take a look at what the top level block type actually is, and we can now go ahead and weld this stuff right in there. So again, all of these are actually should be block token as well. So I should just go ahead and replace those real quick. And that should get us most of the way there. But I would like, again, to just sort of weld these in. You can see the subdir stuff happening here. And so one thing I could do is say, yeah, the subdir stuff could also be part of this pipe. I guess I don't actually know if we want to do it quite this way. But if you imagine extending this out to sort of say, look, let's put all the things in here. So we've got default, music, sound, like so on. Then what we could do is say, well, maybe these things are actually nested. Maybe. I don't really know exactly how I want that to work, but let's suppose they were. So let's suppose these things were nested like this. And we wanted to do something where we said, okay, so all of these all come from the same subdirectory. Maybe that's a mistake. Maybe we should have everything in its own subdirectory. I don't know. We're certainly free to do that. We could propagate that subdir switch down a little bit, but I guess what I'm suggesting is this, right? So yeah, is default would be true here. Is music would be true here, and is sound would be true here. I don't know if I actually want both of those. I don't know that that's actually necessary. I might just want one, which is audio, because I don't think there's any reason to differentiate between those two, but we'll see. In the meantime, I do want is the music to come from the music dir and the sound to come from the sound dir, because those are actually currently separated, at least the way that we decided to do our assets for the first part. So we do want to look roughly like that, but again, I'm not sure whether we need is music or is sound. I'm going to take a really brief stroll and see if we actually care. You know, we never really care. So I think for now, because I don't have any reason not to, I'm going to have an is art and is audio, and that's it. I'm not going to have the sound one. So I'm going to do something like that, where we say, look, they go in different directories, but they're treated the same for all intents and purposes here. And so then what I'm going to do is pull this part up, because now this doesn't need to happen anymore, right? That's not part of it. And what I'm going to do is inside here, I'm going to say, this is what we need to know for audio. We don't care about the parse pieces aspect of things because we're not calling that anymore anyway. And so we're going to do something like this, right? So the import type is audio for both of these, and the tags are the same for both of these. In the future, we may change the tags between music and sound. Like maybe we'll tag them slightly differently. I'm not sure. But for now, we are going to tag them the same because we don't actually have anything we need to do differently between them. We're then going to keep this part here, but we want to have some way of making it clear that we didn't understand what the block type actually was. So I think rather, you know, this import none part here, I don't know that we actually want to error on it there. I think we were erroring on it there just because, right? So I don't know. we may want to do something more like this. If import type none, then we don't need to do anything, right? In this case. And, well, I guess I can still have the invalid default case show up here. But I think that'd probably be fine. And I think all I really want to do there is when we are looking at these tag types, I want to go ahead and produce an error that says I didn't recognize the block, right? Because that's what's really going on here when we, have these different multi-tile things, whatever. That I think that's actually what we want to have happen. So when we come through here and we get, one of these errors, we can just say, look, and I don't remember what our thing is. It's just the tokenizer in the block, right? Yeah. So in here, I don't actually know that this matters at all. I don't think it does. So I'm going to get rid of it. And I'm going to take this error and put it where it actually probably, arguably belonged in the first place, which is right here, which is to say, if we can't find, among all of the different types of directives that we expect to see, if we can't find anything that matches what we saw in the file, then that's an error that the block token that we saw, we don't know what it, you put in some kind of an art import directive we just never have heard of, right? So I think that makes just a much more coherent import path, and it unifies everything together in a much cleaner way. It also makes this easier to read because basically you can see the steps, and I can even sort of narrate them here in a sense. I can say, step 1 here, right, is, determine the import type from the block type. So that happens. Then what we do is we parse the actual contents of this thing. So here, actually, this is, we find the matching asset file, right? And then here, we prepare the grid for matching, which is, I guess, not that interesting. And then we do the parse. So this is what actually happens at the moment, and then we parse the contents. So we parse the contents of the block, doing whatever we need to do for that. And then finally here at the end, we actually rebuild the asset contents. Right? And so it's a pretty involved process, but it's actually not, that hard to understand now that it's all laid out. And I think this makes it a lot clearer how this is going, because now it's really obvious how these things are getting tagged up. And you can kind of see now that these things are just shorthand for applying a particular tag array. What that means is that in the future, what we could consider doing is we could consider just defining these in a file themselves. So if in the future we just want to get rid of the concept that these things are hard-coded, we could instead just have a way that we parse these, and we create those tag arrays out of the parsed contents and then apply them. So what that leaves us now is all we need to do is have an actual inside the parse HHT part where we actually, well, actually I guess it's probably actually out here. When we do the create audio channel tag grid, again, not a hag grid, but a tag grid, what we need to do is initialize all of these. So for all of these, we need to do a create call. So this is like create art block tag grid, right? And we're going to do this for every single one. So this is create art head tag grid. And we'll need to pass a few other things to this probably, but we'll find out in a second what those actually are. So here's the body tag grid. Oops. And so on and so forth. Right? So these are all going to be this way, that. And they're all going to be done like this, I think. Something like that. And again, I don't really know what we're going to pass here. But probably the game assets, I'm guessing. And what are these? Art obstacle tag grid. And art plate tag grid. There we go. So I think that's all of them. And these are each just going to create that array of tags that we expected to see. So it's really just us taking this parse pieces structure and breaking it up, right? So what we want to do is effectively call this, and we just need it to be, we just need to make sure that we do it. You kind of see the tokenizer's never really used anymore. In fact, the only reason we were using it is when we ran out of tag space. We were issuing an error there. So I think the way I would rather do that is just have this now raise some kind of an error when it fails, that we then just error on, because now we know that there's no way for having a parsing error, if that makes sense. So we should be able to just make this be something that checks the error at the end and returns like true or false or something like that, right? So it should be pretty straightforward to make this work without the tokenizer. So I think all we really needed to do at that point is we just need to pass the game asset structure, because that's the only thing that's actually going to be used here. And so these should all take assets in addition, and that's it at the moment. We actually don't really even need to do that even, but, you know, like, we only really need to be so specific here. We don't need to go completely overboard. But anyway, so getting rid of these, we don't need type token and we don't need tokenizer. All we need is a pointer to the tags that we're actually filling out, and then the game assets part here, which is what we're using to like actually allocate those tag arrays. And after we do parse pieces, again, we're not returning an import type because we're not doing this determination anymore. So parse pieces as a template for these things, I think all we really want to do is return a B32 that tells us, did it work, right? And that way we can also take that one error that we actually do care about if it happened, and we can throw that into the process here. So, you know, when we do all of this part of things, we can issue that error message pretty directly, right? And that should get us out of the business of passing the tokenizer around as well. So if I just go ahead and make this a thing where it says, look, if all of these don't succeed, then we're in trouble and we don't want to really proceed, right? So in here where we've got an out F to the, you can see writing to the error stream to start with there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an if here where, like, if all of these things succeeded, then we proceed with the import as we would normally do. And if we don't, then we just abort, like right off the bat. Okay? So that should be fine. And again, we don't have a tokenizer at this point, so we're not issuing an error on that. What we're actually going to issue an error on is, you know, the error stream directly. And so this is going to be an like error, you know, out of tag space. And I think we can even get rid of this error eventually if we wanted to by just creating these at startup in the Handmade internal context. And then we would just always have them. They're just something we know we allocated space for. So again, just sort of slowly moving this to something now that we've seen how it actually works in practice, we can migrate everything out to things that are less troublesome and less likely to fail. which is what you want. So I think that should be roughly all we need to do to, start things up. And now we just need to actually process this stuff. If you look at where the tokenizer was happening here, I'm going to get rid of that. I'm also going to get rid of it here. The tag builder, what you can see is the tag builder is, generally speaking, something that's happening inside like one of these kinds of calls or directly in here, I guess. Yeah, you can see like a begin tags here. And so those begin tags, end tags thing, I guess all we really want to do is just have it so that those builder errors propagate outward, right? I think that's all we really want. Seems fairly straightforward. The import body returning an import grid tag, to be honest, I don't really understand what that's doing. Oh, I see. I see what's going on there. So these import head and import bodies, you send them down like an index for that set, and that way you can put multiple things in there. I see. That makes sense. So yeah, I guess the main problem that we're going to face here is we would like to return an error message out from inside of these things, and we don't really want to have to worry about when it actually occurred. So that part's a little bit uglier, and we're going to have to take a look at how we want to do that. We would just like to have that be remembered as kind of as we go up the stack. But we'll see what we want to do there. So let's start by just having it work. And again, this is the part right here that we end up with. Now that I think about it, it seems like we could just check to make sure we didn't run out of headroom, right? That actually seems like the easiest thing to do. So basically, if we ever hit the... Yeah, I mean, now that I think about it, that's all we really needed. Because we can't proceed anyway if that was hit, so we don't really need to know... We don't really need to know that we hit that with that kind of fidelity. What we can actually just do is this. Right? This is more than sufficient. So we just build all these things. We don't even have to look for errors. When we get to the end, if we were up against the limit, we want to bail anyway. Because either that meant that we hit the tag limit already, or we're about to when we parse this thing. And so that's sufficient for tracking those errors. And like I said, I don't really care that much about it because this we could really just do differently anyway. Having these tags go through the asset system in the first place is not really that necessary because these are templates they get copied from. They could have just been allocated separately. So it's kind of just a legacy of how we happen to create these things in the first place that they even bother to go through the asset system. So I think that's fine. So I think what I'm going to do here is just get rid of that concept altogether. I mean, I guess I can leave the errors in there because why not? But we're not going to actually look at them or do anything with them, if that makes sense. And so all of this stuff can just happen exactly the way that it was happening. The only difference now is that the tokenizer is out of the mix. So anybody who was previously passing that around to do stuff with it is no longer going to have to, and they can just continue about their business. So I'm going to remove the tokenizer from these, and then inside parse pieces now, all I really need to do is just break this up instead of each of these being sort of its own separate if block inside a larger parse that gets past something to sort of switch on the block, the head, the body. Instead, each of these is now just the function that creates the tags for that specific thing. So, for example, create art block tag grid would be, again, tag grid, not Hagrid. I can't stress that enough. That's going to be one of the calls. Again, the templates match correctly now. It doesn't return anything. It just initializes what it is. You can see that we've got a to-do in here that says to do exactly the thing that we're actually literally doing right now. That's great. I like to knock off a to-do when I can. And so all I'm going to do first is I'm just going to, one by one, split these off into separate code paths for whichever one I'm actually looking at. So this is the art head tag grid here. I guess I can actually do this a little bit more efficiently by just doing that, right? This is the art body tag grid. Bring that up there. This is the art character tag grid. This is the art cover tag grid, which we never did. We don't really know how this is going to work. So there's the art cover tag grid, there's the art hand tag grid, there is the art item tag grid, oops, the art obstacles tag grid, and the art plate tag grid. So I think that's pretty much that. And all we need to do now is go through these and actually make sure they work correctly with, you know, how they've now been pulled out. So I think all we really would have to do is remove the import single tile, right? I think that's really all that has to happen. Everything else that's happening in here is pretty much what it should be, right? It's just iterating over the grids and setting those things. So I think we should be fine. I gotta remove the tokenizer because, again, that's not something that we're actually using anymore. So everywhere that was previously getting passed down, it now just goes away. But other than that, I think we're good. So these routines should be able to operate identically to how they were previously operating. That's it. And now we also have a clear shot at exactly how we would implement the thing for our sounds, right? You could, oops, I don't know what that just did. Oh, yeah, there we go. Right, because now we can see how the sounds should get laid in here. We want to essentially take, you know, one of these where we're doing the, you know, sort of the enumeration of the asset import structure, right? So we're going over the entire array. We want to do this same thing now. We want to do for create audio channel tag grid. What we want to do is say, all right, here's the tag grid that I want you to fill out. Loop over the whole thing. And all we're doing is we're adding, you know, we're effectively doing this, right? We're saying, okay, y index, x index. This is the tag that we're going to import. We'll do a build on that. Well, actually, we don't even really need to do that. I don't know why I bothered with that. This will work just fine. So we're going to do a builder on this. We're going to then do an end tags call into here. The asset type, in this case, the basic asset type, I'll be honest, I do not remember how we chose to align those basic asset types. So where are those defined? Asset block. So I guess it's these, right? And so I think, as far as asset categories are concerned, I don't really know what we want here. We can do just asset audio and leave it at that. I don't think we really have to differentiate. So I'm probably just going to go ahead and do this. Asset basic category, I don't know if you can get that as a string. You may not be able to. So type from IDV0, that's not what that is. Yeah, I don't think we actually made a name table for these. So I don't even think that matters. So what we're doing here is just going to say, look, the tag is it's always in the asset audio section. The begin tags, end tags part here is going to properly label as asset audio. So the only thing we need to do now is have an add tag that puts in which channel it thought it was. So in terms of the channel index, we just want to set that to the combination of the X and Y index. Obviously, the X index gives it sort of which channel it is incrementally, but the Y is going to go by X strides. So we essentially have to do something like this, where we take the asset, that's one entire row is asset import grid max. So we want to take the y index, multiply it by that, and that'll sort of give us our channel index. We can make that into a variable here just so it's easier for us to see what we're actually doing. It's just a little clearer if I say that, right? I can do this. Furthermore, I can do that without doing the F32, so we can be a little bit more explicit. Like, look, this is an integer. We're just storing it as an F32 because we do that uniformly for all our tags. We don't have to have like typed tags. But you can see that it's actually getting created, you know, effectively as a U32 there because it's always going to be something linear like that with no fractional component. So in here we would say, all right, we're going to do an add tag for the builder tag channel index with the channel index in there. That's exactly what we need. That will create the entire audio tag grid, which now gives us a complete set of tag labels for every import type that we had, right? So let's take a look at where we screwed up in terms of, you know, whatever's not getting done here. So yeah, okay, so for here in end tags, for this, where we do end tags, this we do still want, in this particular case, where we're adding the tags in here, we want to do a check for the error. So I'm glad I left it in there. So what we want to do here is say, look, if builder error, now we can say error tokenizer token, and I guess whatever token we sort of ended on, I don't know which one would be the best here. I don't know if we can do a get token. It doesn't look like we can. So I'm just going to do it on just error tokenizer here and say out of tag space, right? So we can still check for out of tag space when the time comes. Inside here, we can also do it. But again, like, you know, it's kind of nasty. Like, I wish we weren't really doing it quite this way. It's a little bit unfortunate that that's still happening, right? Also, in terms of passing the tokenizer, right, this is still not what we would want. And so to a large extent, and we weren't even using it, right? You can see us doing an outf to the errors here. So like we were already assuming we weren't using that tokenizer, but because we had to call end tags, we were feeding it in there. And that was literally just for the error reporting. So you can kind of see that this was kind of maybe a positive change to begin with because we're just, you know, you're not tokenizing anything at that point. So that was kind of a false pass. We really shouldn't have been doing it. And so what I'd like to do, yeah, is just make sure that that end tags there is handled a little bit differently, right? So here we can just say, look, if builder error, then go ahead and outf an error there where we say out of tag space. And that should solve our problem. So now we've got like the subdir situation. I guess I may have accidentally deleted that, or yeah, we didn't copy it up. So we do need to put the subdir in there because we do use that later. I think that's all we needed. And then our is sound, is music. All of these are just is audio now. So everywhere that was happening. I think this is actually a plural. And there should be one more. I guess I didn't see it. Let's take a look. There should be, well, I guess there wasn't. Didn't we have one more is sound? I thought we had one more is sound. I guess, oh, you know what? We got rid of it because we'd already handled that case. All right, so never mind. So let's take a look at the other errors first. So update asset metadata doesn't take the tokenizer anymore, so that's fine. And then in here, we're looking at this builder assets tag count. That's just cut and paste error. We don't have a builder here. We do have the assets, which is all we needed to check. And so that should be the end of that. All right, so this is still a to-do in my mind. To do, Casey, these actually can be created once per run. They don't need to be recreated every import. So it's still a little inefficient. We could just call those at the outset and just use those directly. You could argue we should just do that right now. I really can't think of a reason not to, so maybe that would be smarter. Let's take a quick look at something. So inside Handmade asset, in here, you know, what I'm effectively talking about is, look, if we just want these things to be, you know, created at startup, could we just do this, right? and put the tag arrays in here. That's really all I'm talking about. So in other words, if we wanted to, could we have done this instead, since they are constant across the run? And the only question is, you know, this has to kind of, this import grid tags has to be created, has to be defined earlier in the process if we want to do that, meaning it would have to be in here. So I don't know, looking at this, to be honest, this actually looks like, for the most part, this could actually precede the game asset. So, you know, I'll be honest with you, I think if we want to, in the definitions, we could actually just swap these and then be done. So we could do this, and I think that would just work. Yeah. This piece of information, asset import grid max, I don't know where that's at, but we can just put it here. Okay. So I think that completely solves that problem for us. So if we want to, we can actually just do the right thing right off the bat. Inside Handmade asset, if we just let these be defined here on the internal run of the game, then what I can do is delete them from here entirely. When we actually start up, so if I go into the import code here, we can just get rid of this and put that into asset.cpp. And so we already kind of have, I believe, this already kind of switches on this when we do our init, because it's going to do some, well, you can see it right here. It adds like import headroom to a bunch of stuff that would not normally be there. You can see that happening. And so at the end, if we want to, we can just go ahead and do this, right? So that would get us out of that business entirely. And I think that's probably what we want. And so now we just need to go ahead and make that be the case. So if I now said, okay, all of these things are off of the assets instead, like so. Instead of the context, then we can just get them there from now on, and they are only created one time. So I think that's all we really need to do. We don't need this call anymore either. That check is now redundant with checks that are happening on the inside. And I think that pretty much takes care of it. So if we then go up into the part where we were actually cracking out which type of block we were looking at, and you look in here and see where we're getting these template tags, all that we're going to change here is when we get those assets out, they're in the context. We were previously looking directly in the context. We would now just be looking at the assets structure itself, right? So each time through here, we're just, you know, we're just doing that. But otherwise, it's exactly the same. So we're just pulling them out of a permanent place that they live for the entire run of the game. And we're not creating them every time like we were before. Now, I'm assuming, and there's a couple of different ways we could solve this. The problem we're going to run into here is that all of these are defined in a file that hasn't been included yet. This is also off of the assets. Sorry about that. So if we look at what we're getting here, these are, you know, because of the way that handmade.cpp includes these in order, and just because C is, you know, and C++ are kind of garbage, you have this order dependence. So the fact that import comes after asset is a problem. If we, either one we do, I suspect we'll end up with some, yeah, you can see like unload and get file, right? They go in here. So I'm not sure how I'd rather do the predefines for these, but I think since the asset system is the more general system, what I'm going to do is I'm going to loft the predefines. I'm going to loft the forward declarations up from asset, not from import. There's really no difference between what I'm... This is, again, just working around C and C++ being lousy. You know, C has an excuse. It's from the 70s. C++ has no excuse, just incompetence. But either way, you end up with a language that doesn't work. And this is part of the cost you pay. So getting these two predefined is one thing we'll need. We need a couple other things from there. You can see them listed here. Init source HHA, get file, and so on. So let's just look at those. Oops. Init source HHA. We'll grab that out here. Get file. That's this. And so again, these are, all that we're doing there, just saying, look, these are the things that you need to do inside the import layer. So get asset type. Wait, is it set asset type? Sorry, set asset type. Here we go. I don't know why this is still an inline. That should not be the case. Inlines really just shouldn't exist. We should just get rid of them. Internal is sufficient. The compiler will automatically do that for us in pretty much all cases that we actually care. The inline keyword is not really doing anything for us, so it's just kind of annoying. Get or create asset source file. I don't know what, looks like we've got two of these. Not sure which one we're calling. I would assume it's probably this one, but I don't know. So let's take a look. Yeah. And then that get asset call should also be lofted up. And I think that's it. Everything else should be fine. Looks good. And so now I think we've got everything in place. And we also cleaned up how we were doing it previously in terms of creating those tag sets. So that's a good thing too. Now, I want to go back and actually make sure that any of this stuff actually works at all. So now we're going to start the debugging runs. Obviously, this is something we could step through at the outset just to make sure that we're creating those the way that we think. Allocate game assets is the function. It's called at startup. If I set a breakpoint there and jump into that, I can just, I don't want to walk through all of this again. We don't really have any need to inspect that at the moment. So if I jump down here and we step to it, then we can take a look and make sure that these are getting created in some reasonable way. So create audio channel tag grid as we're looping through those. Oh, it looks like I'm in release mode too, which is not really what I want. So I might just back off for a second there and compile in debug mode, make it a little bit easier to walk through it, because this is, I'm trying to do like a clean inspection of this code to make sure that I don't see anything out of place, and that gets significantly harder to do if the, IP is jumping all over the place and I can't read the source code cleanly, which is what would happen if it was in release mode. So I'm going to go ahead and step in to this stuff. I want to make sure that these are cleared to begin with. So as I step in here, I want to be able to look at tags and make sure that all of these are set to like nothing, right? I want to see that there's nothing in them, that they're all set to 0 in all cases, right? Like everything's an asset none. And it looks like that's what I'm getting. And so that's good. Oh, that's pretty interesting. So George, there is a bug here. It looks like the way that traces are stored in terms of what is expanded is a little buggy. So the IDs that are generated for these, like, I don't know if you watched that, but if 0 is expanded, it goes like that. If 1 is then expanded, it inherits that pass-through, that expansion. But then if you unpack this one, the expansion goes away, right? Because it looks like it's using only the first. It looks like it's using like the iteration order or something, as opposed to some kind of stable addressing for which one these are. It's kind of a hard problem in a basic IAM GUI. It may be that they just don't have a good version of that inside Dear IAM GUI. I'm not sure. But in terms of the way you need to build IDs for things like that, it does get a little bit harder. And so that's one thing you might want to look at. Not particularly essential, but it's an interesting thing to note. So if we go ahead and look at this, what I would expect to see now is every time we loop through one of these parts of the grid, I want to add one thing to it. So the first thing I would expect I would change this to an asset audio. By the way, George, nice work on giving the enum names here. That's really handy. Kind of an advanced debugger feature when you think about it. It's just like helpfully providing information for you that's actually not part of the raw display, right? It has to go like, oh, this is one of these enums. Let me go look up what the name of that enum would have been in the PDB or whatever, right? So anyway, you can see this getting set up here, and that's exactly what I wanted to see happen. it's creating two tags, one that says it's an asset audio and one that says there's a channel in there. The channel index in this case should be actually 0, and that channel index should go up with each time. So as we go through here, you can see channel index 1, channel index 2, 3, 4, blah, 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 right? I wonder. That's nice. I really like that you can lock that down. So you can see it. Like, this is one of my big pet peeves, like in Visual Studio. You can't, once you get to here, you can't inspect a variable that's in the loop. You used to be able to, and then they broke it. And it looks like normally, oh, and you can here too? That wasn't showing up before. It just said not, oh, because I entered it there, I guess. So that's pretty cool. Like, this is just way better than Visual Studio. Like, that disappears immediately, right? And it's really annoying. So it's pretty cool that that still shows up. So yeah, I mean, I don't know how long it's going to take George to get to the point where all this, because there's a couple of things that Remedy doesn't have that obviously you need, like data breakpoints I don't think are in there. So there's some basic debugging features that haven't gotten implemented yet, but just based on where it's at right now and how stable it seems to be in daily use, this is just clearly going to be better than Visual Studio. Like, I mean, not to mention the fact that it updates in real time, right? Like, Visual Studio, this value would be sitting there for like a second, and you just wonder what it was, and then it pops in, you know? So yeah, I would highly recommend ditching Visual Studio. It's a piece of garbage, and we've been stuck with it for too long. Buy a copy of Remedy for $20 and start sending bug reports on the forums or something. Let's go ahead and get this tool to where it needs to be so we just don't have to ever think about Visual Studio again. I mean, it's obviously close enough. It's obviously useful for day-to-day work. It's way better than WinBag now in terms of usability. You know, it doesn't have all the features that WinBag has, but it's like way more usable. And it's been smoothed out over the past 2 or 3 months to the point where, like, really it's just a few features that I feel like I miss sometimes, but I'm no longer at the part where I'm like hitting, oh, there's this bug or that bug. Like, it's really kind of feeling pretty solid in terms of getting the work done. It's great work. Really, really, really well done. So anyway, I feel like this stuff is pretty well taken care of now in here. Let's just take a look at one of the art ones, because that was the one that we wrote anew, the audio channel one. Let's just make sure that the art ones are working as well. So, you know, this just tags this thing as a block with no tags. That seems fine. This goes through and does the import body tags. Let's make sure those are reasonable. It does look like they are. Yeah. So I'm pretty happy with that. That all seems fine. So I'll just skip right down to the actual important part of things. If we go through synchronize asset file changes now, I don't know if we'll hit any asset changes on our art. You know, we changed a little bit with how the tags were working, but they should still basically be creating fundamentally the same tags in the same order, I think. So it probably won't, I hope, actually change any of our art. So I don't think we should see any art import retriggers, but I could be wrong. What we will see is audio import retriggers because those are completely new and we've never seen them before. So let's go ahead and see how that works. We are going through the top of a block parsing here. We should be parsing the default block, and we are... What? Oh, okay. I see a bug right away. Those ifs were supposed to have elses, and they don't. So that would have been a bug right off the bat. I'm glad we stepped through that, because that would have been annoying. Right? These are supposed to... Like, we aren't ever supposed to get to this case if any of these hit. And so that was just that's a straight-up bug right there. Nothing good about that. So let's try that again. I'm going to re-step to just this point, since we know that was the first time we were coming through here. I should be able to step right to it. Let's go ahead and step through that. Now we see it's we skip the rest of this, which is what we want. We can go through here. Where's my disassembly window? Where did it go? I feel like it went away. I don't know why it went away, but it did. So let me get that back up there. I just like having that available in case I need to quickly look at what's going on. It just helps to kind of get in there, right? Can I step through with F10? Oh, that's nice. Can I? Oh, no, I can't. Okay, so here's another thing to note. Since I love the fact that that X13 Pixels watches the stream, I can kind of do live bug reports, save me some time. So it looks like when you hit F10, if you're in the disassembly window, it properly knows to do a single assembly step, but then it switches your window to the source view, which means your next time you hit F10 won't be a disassembly step. So it would be nice if you're in the disassembly window, if it didn't grab the focus back out. I know it's a minor thing, but I'd like to be able to click in here and just step through the assembly. Now, I know I can do that using this, which is the Control-Shift F10, but Control-Shift F10 is just kind of hard to hold your finger on, so it's kind of just a lot easier to like click in here and then go, you know, for what it's worth. Anyway, so going through here, that doesn't matter for us at all. We're not trying to step through the assembly today, so we don't care. We could care less about that. So coming through here into the parser, here we're just looking to see what's in that default field. We got that stuff. There's really not much we need to do here. It all seems fine. Get those descriptions loaded. And now we should just go ahead and skip the default case, which is what we did. Right, so we come in here and we get those default fields and we load those up. So that's exactly what we would expect. Nothing weird going on there. And then when we come through here for the next block, what we should do, I think, is actually parse an art. I think at the moment we're in the intro scene. So I expect to see like a plate or something probably. So we come through here. Let's see what we get. I'm not sure about that. I'd have to go look at the HHC to see what the next thing is. Yeah, there's a plate right there. So we loft up the art plate tags is the thing that we're going to look at. That should basically be like a single tag in the first slot and nothing else, I believe. But don't quote me on that. Let's take a look. What it shows, asset plate. Yep. And nothing else, right? Yeah, so great. Seems to be working perfectly so far. Off we go. Needs full rebuild is false because, well, we probably don't need to. Perfect. We saw that the file is the same, so we don't need to change it with a full rebuild. We can come through here. We're looking for tags. We're getting those tags, hopefully. I mean, I don't know. Maybe we are. Hope we are. Let's see what we've got. Here we go. Asset index. Loading those align points in. That's irrelevant. I don't really care about all that stuff. So that looks like that worked fine. This is just copying. So I'll be honest with you, I have no idea what this is doing. I mean, that's a harsh statement. I know exactly what it's doing. I don't know why. So if you look at what this loop is doing, it's taking the asset alignment points. Well, it's taking the alignment points from that we parsed, and it's assigning them back to the bitmap. But doesn't it need to do that before it writes the thing out? Like, why isn't it doing it? Well, I guess now that I think about it, update asset metadata doesn't write the thing out. So I guess it's fine, because we actually write it out back in the... We write it out back here. So I guess that's actually fine, surprisingly enough. All right, I'm okay with that. So it looks like the art is still loading properly for what it's worth, I guess. Again, I think we, at some point it would be nice to clean this up. If this weren't a thing where I had to do just 2 hours a show, I would probably spend a good 8 hours or two or 3 days just going through it and cleaning everything really carefully, and sort of pulling things out into more verifiable chunks. But we can only do so much with the limited time of the show. So that's kind of where we're at. But we'll call that good enough for now, and we'll wait for bugs to rear their ugly head to spelunk further. What I'd like to do now is jump right to the new blocks and see how they work. So here we are I think still in the intro cutscene. Now, this is probably, I'm just guessing, if I were to look at this, it's probably this, yeah. So this is in the intro cutscene. This first one we hit is this music test.wav. I am narcissistically tagging myself as the author, which of course is true, but probably not super necessary since this isn't even official music for the game. What we want to do is verify that this gets loaded properly. We are in the right tag block, and we are loading those audio channel tags. We're looking in the music subdir, so that's good. Now let's see what actually happens. When we build the source path, I'd like to see if it actually looks reasonable. And it does. One thing, while we're on the Remedy list of requested features, it would be awesome if there was some way to get this whole string. I know Visual Studio does this weird, crappy thing where they put like a little magnifying glass on it. That kind of sucks. So I wouldn't recommend it, but what I would say is, like, let's say best of all possible worlds. One thing you could do there is have the watch window have an option. So, if I right click on this or something, or I don't know where options would go normally, but, let's say there's a right click menu or something that has settings. Like, where is that for, like, the call stack, for example? Okay, so, I'm right clicking in here and I'm getting these settings, right? If there was the same thing for the watch window, just have a string window, and then when you highlight something, like, or whatever, it shows the whole string. Another way you could do it is if you did, like, I don't know, I'm making this up, but something like that, and then it would just make this part bigger, right? So it could fit, several lines, it could wrap this so I can see the whole thing. I don't know the exact right way. I haven't thought about it in a long time, but like the Visual Studio one sucks because you click it open and it opens a separate window, which I don't want, right? I want to see things in the watch window. It's modal, so I can't step, right? Which is also terrible. But it is something you want, which is the ability to see a longer block of text. And so, I don't know, I would say when you get a chance, I know this is a lot of work to handle all this stuff in the debugger, but when you get a chance, think about something like that. You can think of it sort of in the same concept, the same domain as, like, eventually you want to be able to see, like, images and stuff, right? And so it would be great if you could have, like, an image show up in here if you, could set the format, like, oh, it's RGBA or something, and, here's how big it is, this width, this height, I don't know, right? It would, take some space to show that thing. The same would be true for strings. Like, how do you make a clean interface for always showing, the contents of the thing for when I've got a few things I want to watch, Again, I don't have a strong opinion. I haven't thought it through particularly carefully, but I do think there's something there. Like, here's stuff I need to view that's more complicated than just a simple value. How do I get that into a coherent, easy to understand way that lots of different data types could eventually take advantage of? I want to view sound waves, same thing, right? Like, basically providing little widgets here that you can interact with that more in-depth view something. You typically want them to still sort of work with the watch window in some way so they can constantly be updated as necessary, and so it's not this huge pain in the butt. I've often thought the same thing about the memory window. Like, I don't really want a memory window. What I want is the ability to have some memory ranges shown in here, so I can have more than one of them and have them update as I go, right? And so I feel like, thinking about how to extend the watch window into something that has the widgets built into it is kind of an interesting concept going forward. You know what I mean? And you could even think of that as a way, you know, as unifying some of these things, like, oh, you know, I can just do like that, and this shows up in here, makes there not really be a need for a lot of this other stuff sometimes, right? So, you know, one of the things, that sort of stuff in Visual Studio, forget it, because it's this weird, like, giant C# framework that's just a, you know, garbage pail. When you're in an IMGUI setting, it actually becomes not that prohibitively expensive to just widgetify some block as necessary, you know, when it's visual. And then these sorts of things can just unify in there. It's just something to think about. Again, it's half-baked. I realize that. It's something to think about that maybe would save you time in the long run, because instead of having to constantly think about things as all these separate windows and I got to re-implement all this stuff, it's like everything can just go through one thing and that's it, right? I don't know. It's just neither here nor there. Moving away from pie in the sky nonsense, debugger nonsense, going through here, it looks like this is the right thing. I should probably verify that actually does exist. Oh, it says file not found. Oh, you know what? That might be true. We may have put that in the wrong directory, did we? So here's our Handmade sources. In intro cutscene, that's not where we put the music, and that is where that should have gone. So I think actually our code is smarter than we are. This is not in the right place, and it should be placed here. So actually, good work, code. You caught us. Let's go ahead and rerun. I think I've still got the breakpoint set there. So here we go. Let's see if it can find it now that I actually put it in the right place. There it is. Okay, so that time it worked. We need a full rebuild because it's never seen this file before. So let's go ahead and go through here. Here's our tokenizer parsing stuff. We've got everything that we need, I think, I hope. Let's parse those tags. We should get the tag here. There it is, title screen. That is the tag that we expected. And we should also, by the way, this kind of does, it looks sort of like Remedy almost already does the thing I wanted. It just doesn't wrap, right? Because you can see when there's actually new lines in the string, it actually displayed the whole thing, right? It just doesn't wrap. So that's actually pretty cool that it already does. It already does take more room so you can see it. It just doesn't actually wrap the text. So it's really just a wrap, like right click and hit wrap long lines or something was all that really needed here. It looks like, sort of. Although if the string were really long, if this string keeps going, you still kind of want the text inspection widget so you can scroll down and like see more of it or something. I don't know. Again, neither here nor there. These are all just like, hey, now that the debugger is replacing Visual Studio, what if we actually started adding features that Visual Studio never had and should have? Anyway, so that all looks fine, and the tag ID is presumably the right tag ID. I don't actually know. It looks like it is title screen. There it is. So if we go ahead and assume that the tags are now correct on this thing, the question is, can we actually load the WAV file, which is the lion's share of the work? Let's take a look. So we go through, we find the match. We know that we don't actually have this assigned to anything yet. So we're going to have to. We come through the full rebuild path. We try to load the file. We do. It looks like we successfully got it. In here, we now need to do the checksum of the file to set it up properly. And then we need to read this into the WAV file. This read stream, this content stream nonsense should really go in here. We don't need this for anything. Looks like that's wrong, by the way. I don't know if you care about that. Like the cursor position is wrong. I'm not sure. I certainly don't care, but it's worth noting. So the make read stream there, when I get that contents stream back, we don't actually care about it unless it's art. So that should probably be in here. But either way, here's our sound loading code. We get to is audio. We need to start parsing this WAV file. We come into the parse WAV call, and we're going to try to iterate the riff section of things. It looks like the header was correct because we passed the if statement. So, you know, hopefully this is correct. I don't know how to inspect this in a different way. I don't even know how to change to hex inspection, or if there even is such a thing, because one of the things that's true about Remedy is I only just started using it. So I really don't know much about how I would do that, so I couldn't tell you. Maybe it can't do that, but maybe it can, and I just don't know how. So I can't really look to see whether the riff ID is correct. I don't know if it supports this kind of thing yet. No. So it looks like it... Oh, well, although... Yeah, there we go. So it does actually support that. So the riff ID does look like it says riff. So it looks like we are looking at that correctly. And similarly, here is the file type ID wave. So that's pretty cool. Actually, this didn't used to work in Remedy, so I think the latest version... I know that George said he put in a real expression parser. It looks like it's working great, because I don't remember being able to do that last week. So like, this is pretty awesome, because that's really handy for obvious reasons. You can see me why I wanted it right there, and that's great. So that's a pretty big improvement, and a really useful one. Right? Like, that's one that really adds a lot of value. Having good expression parsing is pretty great. All right, so at some point I gotta learn. I don't know, it might actually have this in the README. I should probably look. I don't actually know how the expression parser works though. Like, I don't know what else it can do. Let's see here. Oh wow, I get greets. Awesome. Thanks for the greets. Thanks for the greets, man. Visual Studio absolutely deserves these greets right here. So, yeah, okay, so you see all this stuff? Like, this is important stuff, right? That I don't know, and I need to learn. So there's a relative scoping. So, like, the previous scope or the first ancestor scope. This is awesome, by the way. Like, this is... So just to show you what this is really pretty cool. So let's say I'm up here, right? You can see that there's this sound struct, or this is audio, right? And so if I was here, you can see that I can get that is audio. When I drop down here, I can't. And the reason for that is because Remedy correctly is showing me things that resolve in my current scope. But if for some reason I wanted to see that, it's suggesting I can just do... Sorry, I need to look it up again. It's suggesting I could just do... Hey, look up scope. Just keep going up till you find it. I mean, look at that. How awesome is that? So now I can just look up stuff that's like out here, and it will find it even when I'm in here. That's just super awesome. Like, that's just great, right? Again, there's so many great features you could add to a debugger if you just aren't Visual Studio and you actually care about debugging. And so it's so cool to see that stuff coming together, because that's just awesome. I mean, that's really going to be the point where it's obvious you have to switch, where it's not just a case of Visual Studio is annoying, but it'll actually be a case of Visual Studio just doesn't have the features that are actually good. So I don't know, like, I should learn that. So probably that's the most important one, is caret star, because that says, like, go up. Lock expression will lock it into its scope. So that's like, if I go up here and I do is audio, I guess I can lock that in at its current scope and then go down, and now it'll remain. Again, really awesome. I love it. Format specifier off the formatting or display. Currently only a single format supported. This is for specifying the number of elements displayed in an array or pointer. The syntax of the format specifier is comma at the end. So that's the same as Visual Studio. So I don't really need to learn anything for that. That's how that worked before. So for example, if I wanted to look at path, don't know if there is a path up above. What is up above? Something back here, right? No, there really isn't. Well, file buffer. File buffer is a thing. It's not a string, but it does exist up there. So if I do file buffer, there it is. If I do this, the data array, kind of stressing things out now, but let's try it. So if I did that star, I don't know, I'm really pushing things here, but if I were to do that, can I do, I don't know how I would do this. Is it that? It is. That's really awesome. So if I wanted to see more of this thing, I do that. Awesome. Yeah, this thing is super cool. All right, cool. So you can basically say, like, look up in prior scopes, find this thing, show me 16 elements of it, and that all just worked flawlessly. That's pretty great. Yeah. Looking great. Looking really, really good. All right, so moving along here, enough with us saying how good Remedy is. We should probably try to get our own code working as opposed to looking at someone else's code who got their code working. Let's go through and see what we've got here. I guess this properly starts at the first chunk. So we're skipping the first chunk. I don't know if that's correct. I kind of don't think it is. Like, I feel like the first chunk... So... I want to look at that. That looks like maybe a bit of copy pasta, sort of, potentially. So I just want to look at the riff iterator code here and just see. So you can see that the header is not the thing that it's pointing to initially, right? It parts of the first one. So I don't think this is correct. I'm going to say that that's wrong. You don't skip the first one. The header is peeled off as a separate thing. So I think that's not what we want. So I'm going to say that that's bad, and we're going to skip that run through, and we're going to jump into a new run through that doesn't do that. Because it may have worked, but it would still be incorrect because it would have been skipping some chunk, and maybe that chunk is not one of the two chunks we actually care about, FMT and DATA. But just because it would work with that WAV file, it could easily have not worked with another where one of those two chunks was the first chunk, and so I'm pretty sure we didn't want that. So off we go. And it looks like it actually would have failed, because it looks like the first chunk actually is the FMT chunk, which is a format chunk, which is the one we need. So I think that's probably important that we fix that. All right, so we get the data out, we get the format out. It looks like there's some other chunks, probably like an info chunk or something, and we ignore it. We come down here and we've got the channel and sample count, and what we're doing here, we're going to push a sound on that's the essentially the de-interleaved version of this thing, and we're just going through de-interleaving it, right? Like this is just a de-interleave. And so just to visualize what's actually going on there, if we take a look at what the channel count actually is, you can see that this is actually a dual channel sound. It's stereo because it's music, right? It's not a sound effect, so it kind of has spatialization already built into it. And so that channel count of 2 means that we're doing a de-interleave by 2. We should be able to watch that de-interleave happen. If I look at source samples, using the stuff that we just looked at, sample data. If we look at those samples, well, unfortunately, it looks like it starts with silence, which is kind of what you would expect. I don't know where it actually starts being not silent. I'm sorry for pushing 500 things onto the immediate mode stack here, but let's see. So really there's like just a ton of silence at the beginning of this file. So de-interleaving, I would rather we had some structured art there. I'm just going to assume that it works for now. we really should go through and try to visualize that if there was some actual data in there, but all we would see right now is just writing zeros everywhere, so it'd be impossible to tell if it was actually de-interleaving anything or not. So if we get through here and go to the actual return after these two things have been de-interleaved, now we'd expect the sound to contain those de-interleaves. So it should have two sort of channels. Each one is about 7.5 million samples long, and there'd be two blocks inside here. When we come to process audio, that's going to actually trigger, I think, the long sound case. This part it doesn't have to worry about because obviously there's only two channels, not 64 channels, which is more than any sound should ever have. But when we come through here, the max sample count should absolutely get triggered. It looks like here that's going to be a pretty low number compared to the number of samples in this particular sound. So that's the the number of samples that we're talking about here. And if we look at how many samples, how many chunks we have to break it into, it should actually be substantial. So if I look at total chunk count, let's see, 57, right? So this is a pretty long streaming piece of music, and it's just going to chop it up into little pieces. And so when it actually does this, it's going to look and see what the asset index is. There isn't one currently, so it knows it has to reserve a set of 57. Of those, when we come through here, we just check to see if we have enough, and it looks like we do. So we're going to look and see here, 470. The asset count then should increase by that reserve amount that we want there. Oops. There we go. So as we step over this, we're in good shape. We come out here, we've got everything that we want inside the asset index case because we know we actually reserved one. We should now be able to split it into blocks. The sample count remaining should now go down over time as we write out the blocks. Here's the total amount we have. As we go through here, we write out each individual one of these. We're not reusing the assets, so we create a new one every time. We asked to unload this audio, but there actually isn't any audio loaded, so that's a no-op at the time. So that's only if you're updating a thing that was already sort of in the set of known data. We're going to reserve the asset data size here. Let's make sure that asset data size looks about right. That should be double the max sample count because each one's 16 bits. It is, so that's a nice, that lines up with what we expect. In fact, and it lines up, I don't know, can you do this? No, you can't. So I don't think it shows you results of numbers, but I can do that in calc. So if I just say, look, I want to know how big 256K is, which is what I kind of wanted these blocks to be. You can see that's exactly what it is. And so that works out nicely. We set the data size, we pull everything in, and yeah, everything looks fine there. We're going to write that asset data out. So I see a bug though. So this is wrong. This right here is incorrect. So what you can see is what we want is we want the first asset index wants to go in here, right? But we're iterating over these asset indices as we go. And so really what we need to do is outside the while loop, we assign this. And then we write as we go. But, you know, writing this every time will set the asset index to the wrong one. So that is a bug that needs fixing. So almost made it, not quite. So process audio import had a bug in it. The bug is that we're trying to remember the first asset index in our chain. Instead, we're remembering the last asset index in our chain. That's a definite bug. So what we want to do is right before we actually kick in here, when we have the asset index that we've allocated, we set it now. That way, as we come through here and we ink the asset index each time, we're never going to rewrite that asset index back out to the storage, the file remembrance, so that it won't, you know, like in the future, again, think about that. Now, I think, if I'm not mistaken, there's a further bug here, which is that this really should be written per channel, because each channel gets a different asset index out of it. Looking at how this goes and does it here, you can see, yeah, and this is just garbage. This stuff is just garbage. This isn't supposed to be asset import grid divided by 8. It's supposed to be channel index divided by 8. So this is just all wrong. So let's go ahead and fix it, right? Okay. So what we want to do here is say that we've got an asset index slot, right? The asset index slot is going to come out of here. And we're going to rewrite it. Like this. It has to come from the channel index. So what we actually wanted was this. Right? Something along those lines, where we've got the div 8 and the mod 8 split into those two segments. Right? Now there's easier ways to do this. We don't really have to do it that way. We could have done it differently, and you know, I don't know, yeah, exactly how we want to do it, but that's roughly speaking what we would do. Let's actually break that out. Oops. Into something a little bit more specific. Let's say that we've got the X index and the Y index here, so we can at least inspect them and make sure that they're right. And so that's really more what we're talking about here. So if we then come back to this routine and look at it again, hopefully it's more reasonable now. I don't care about this code at the moment. I want to jump right to here. So as we load out this stuff in ParseWave, we're going to assume that worked too, because I looked at it and it looked reasonable. So as we come through here now, I want to see if we got a reasonable X index and Y index. They should both be 0 now, and then as we go to the next channel, we should get a 1 here and a 0 here. So as we produce that asset index, now we're going to write it back to the asset slot once. If we go back and look at the source file itself, so if I do this, and I take a look inside the asset indices for channel 0 right there, the asset index should get written back to there on this line. So that's the asset index. That looks right. As I come through here, we're going to do a sample count remaining kind of clip behavior to write that out. You can see us getting this stuff created here. So the chain equals HHA sound none, and this will determine if we have to clip. It means we will chain to the next one. So let's see. So we pick the sample count. It should be the total sample count, which is here. It should now get clipped to the max sample count, which it does, right? So this is that max sample count, and you can see that that got clipped. We set ourselves up for chaining because we know that we have to go to the next one since we're not going to be able to write the whole sound out here. When we go through here, we should be good to go. This is just creating the total asset data size and, yeah, reserving the data in the file, writing it out. That should be fine. And then we ink that asset index, move the sample pointer forward, and then come through again here. So I think that should be fine as we go. And that'll just loop through 57 times. Hopefully finish with no errors. We'll find out. Off we go. Looks good. All right. So that correctly, we hope, loaded our sound, and we'll see what happens. All right, so looks like we got a break here on one of our assertions. You can see up at the top, there's like a notification here, which is like exception thrown at, right? One thing I meant to mention about this line, it does something a little bit weird, which is the color of the line doesn't change the way that I would expect it to. Like I would expect it when you stop to be red on like an error, or green if it was fine or something, and then orange when it's running or something. But it remains orange even when you stop running, which was weird. I don't know. I'm not sure how this line's supposed to work exactly, but it's kind of like a status, right? And it feels like it just needs a little bit of work there. I don't know. Just something to think about how that's working at the moment. But anyway, moving along, we're getting a problem where we try to do a set asset type here, where it's looking and it seems like this asset maybe already got added or something else weird happened. So what we want to do is figure out where that's occurring and why, and see if we can't stop that from happening. So the first thing to check out is who are we saving? And just to take a look at to what extent, this is some old part of our, is this something that's happening as part of the old art exporting? Or is this actually something that's happening as part of our new sound exporting? Because I don't know which one we're looking at. So let's pop back up the stack here, which is what I did, to look and see what we're exporting. So is it art? Is it audio, right? That kind of thing. So it looks like we're exporting art here, which means that we're getting an error in something that was supposed to already be working, but we've broken it somehow. And there's a lot of different ways that could be happening. We don't actually know where it's getting this set asset type part from. We should probably look here. So it's getting this asset out of the asset pool. It's looking at the import grid. So I guess my question is, what came out of there? So it said it was a plate. That seems eminently reasonable. So it has an asset that it thinks next of type should be set to null on, but it wasn't. So this does at least suggest some kind of a weird bug happening, because it suggests just to walk through it here. When this asset was initially loaded, it was loaded presumably with type 0, which is to say that the asset didn't have a type, so it got shunted into a group of assets that are typeless, right? Like ones that didn't have a type. Assuming that that's what actually happened, and we can go verify that. If that was really what happened, then now it's getting tagged with a type of plate rather than a type of 0, and there really shouldn't have been a type 0 asset getting imported there originally, so I would like to go find out what's up with that. So let's take a quick look and see inside the initial asset startup code when that set asset type is happening. And again, I realize we're supposed to be done, but I just want to take a quick look at this before we proceed. So in here, what I'm trying to say is, well, you can even see that it's happening. This asset type is getting added to the list even if the type ID is 0, which really shouldn't be happening. That's not really something that's supposed to occur, because you're not supposed to look for a type 0 asset. So what I'd like to do is something more like this. I'd like to take a quick look and see why, if I'm right, if this is happening at startup, why did we have asset none plates? How did that happen? Was that just because we had a bug in the importer originally, or is that happening in some other way and we need to go find out how, right? So that's what I would like to take a look at first. So I'm just going to set a breakpoint here when we initially open all of our existing files. I just want to know what's going on here. So you can see that this is happening at least once. I mean, here I am in the code, right? It's actually happening quite a bit, right? That's way too many. So I don't know why we're getting so many assets with a type ID of 0, because how are those getting written out in the first place? Why were we generating so many type ID 0 assets? My only thing I can guess is that we basically had a bug where we were creating type 0 assets for plates or something. How was that happening? I'm really not sure how that could have been happening. What was the name of the tag list stuff? There it is. So if we assume that these are plate assets now, and which is the type that we saw before, and before they weren't, or something, I'm really not sure what was happening there such that they weren't getting tagged as plates. Was there a bug in our original routine? I mean, if we look back, I don't actually know if we've got it up here. But if we look back at the code, yeah, we're not. Can we log in? Probably can't log in. It's gonna ask me to verify some nonsense. If we look back at the previous code, let me grab some authentication here, I guess. So I guess we have to look at the authentication here and see what the authentication is. There we go. So if we look into the code that we were using in the import scheme here, right? So this is the code from last time, and this was the code that was importing our art assets. So if we were on a plate, it still should have set it to asset plate, right? So I'm not 100% sure where we were getting that from. I don't know if it's a problem. Is it a problem with reloading or something? Or, I don't know what's happening there with why we're getting that. Because it should, if you look at what should have happened here, we should not have had that issue. Um, I guess one thing that maybe is the case. I mean, I guess I don't know where exactly those things are coming from. You know, maybe they're coming from the font file or something. Because we're still like reading in some older stuff. Maybe we didn't properly list. I'm really not sure. There are some assets that don't have any types associated with them, and I think font glyphs would probably be one of them, maybe. Don't quote me on that. But like font glyphs would be an example, and another example would be the sounds, like themselves. They're chunks that come after the initial chunk if they're streamed. Those don't have any, it wouldn't have any type associated with them because they're not ever accessed directly. They're only accessed as chains off of the existing sound, off of the initial sound. But I couldn't really say why those would have been getting reassigned to a plate. That seems busted. So I'm kind of at a loss to explain exactly what's going on here. The first thing I want to do is I would like to go ahead and re-import everything and see if it actually, if this error occurs on a fresh import, or if it had something to do with like an old like setup that we had. Like I'd like to get a sense for what's happening there. So let's just see what happens. If I look inside the data directory here, what you can see is that we really only have 3 HHAs. This one is the only one that is not built fresh. It's because it's got fonts and we don't support fonts yet in our new system. But we probably will try to get those in there as well, just so we can kind of have the complete set of things that can be buildable at runtime as necessary. So fonts, you know, we don't have that in there yet. Other than that, these two are built completely from scratch as necessary. And so I would like to know what's going on there. Is this some kind of a, you know, is this something that happens every time we import, or is it just some artifact of what's happening in these files? And I don't know. So I would like to do that. Before I do that, I want to take a look at them and see if I can see that. We do have in our HHA edit program, we do have a way to dump these out. So if we look in the dump directory, yeah, we've got a ton of that stuff. Okay. So if I do HHA edit and I do a dump, not an extract, which would like get all the bitmaps out and stuff, which I don't want to do. If I do an HHA dump of basegame.hha and I put that into basegame.text, I want to then do intro cutscene.hha and put that into intro cutscene.text. And then finally test fonts v2.hha and then test fonts v2.text. I'm then going to go ahead and load up from the bonus pack the tab view app and see if there's anything in here that tells me, you know, what's going on. Oops, that was not what I wanted at all. There we go. Ignore that. So here's that base game one. If I look at these S assets, I guess it's kind of hard to tell. It's not like I can really quickly look through these to see if there's like plates hanging around. You know what I mean? And maybe that's sort of something we should add. I'm kind of inclined to do so. Like for example, let's suppose inside the HHA edit.cpp, and hey, this would give us a reason to add that table. Remember earlier today I was like, we don't actually have a table that says what the asset type actually is. that might be something we want to add. So in here where we do a write HHA, oh, not write HHA, when we do the dump. So in here, where you see us dumping out these assets, we might want to look through the tags and see what's in there. So, you know, in here where we do this tag dump, what we could do is do the tag dump more at the beginning. And when we do that, you know, in other words, here, this is at the, you know, at the tail. I guess we don't have to really do it. I guess we don't really have to do it there. We can still keep it at the end. But at the beginning, you know, when we loop through these assets, right, and we grab one of these out of here, what we could do is before we actually print the line, loop through the tags and extract any information from the tags that we want to print out as sort of more of a heads up. So, you know, in here we would do something like this. Actually, that's not iterating over the, that's not right. That's doing all the tags. We want just the ones for this asset. There it is. So what we want to do is this right here. We want to loop over the asset tags here. And I want to like grab out the one that's the basic type. So in here, I want to do like a if, like so, and I want to grab out the tag this way. So that will get me the tag, and now I can do something that says like what the basic type is. So inside the file formats where we've got this basic category thing, what I want to do is have a way that that gets printed out, and you know, this same thing we've got here where we've got like the name tags, right? I want substantively the exact same thing. So I want to be able to do like a global thing where I do category tag, I guess. And then in here, I just want to do like a const z. And this is, well, these can actually just be in order. They don't have to look like that. So in some sense, this is actually more like the one, we have one like that, don't we? That instead of tags, it's just, no, I guess we don't actually do one of those. It looks like we always have them lined up. Okay, well, that's fine too. So if we want to do that, it's just this. Like so. And so I just want to make sure that these are all like, you know, represented in here. And I'm just going to print out what kind it was. The reason I'm doing that is because it's just too hard. It takes too long for me to like open up each individual one and look to see if it doesn't have an asset category. That's more what I want to know. And so I just want to go through and prep this in a way that allows that to happen a little bit more specifically, right? Here's where macros would be pretty handy. Let's see here. There we go. And now I just need to turn them into something that looks like this. So these commas are not necessary. Although actually, maybe they are. So probably what I want to do is something like this. Right? You can see why macros would be handy, because you could do all this with, because you're doing the same thing. Whenever you're doing the same thing to every line, that's like really the only place I used to use macros in GNU Emacs. Most things you don't really need them for, but stuff like this is just handy because you can do it one time and then, you know, apply it to lots of things at once. All right, so after that, I just need to eliminate the asset part of things here and change those into const z's. In the broader scheme of things, really talking about needing macros is kind of a little bit of a red herring too, because honestly, the fact that we have to do this typing at all is just because C++ is garbage. If C++ was any good, you wouldn't have to do any of this. Because what we're doing right now is manually doing a bunch of text entry and saying it would be nice if our text editor allowed us to automate that text entry, when really we shouldn't have to be doing any of that text entry in the first place, since if the language just had the ability to create things like this from a single list, we would be good to go. You can also sort of, there's sort of a poor man's version of this that you can do where you include, you can list these things once in an include file and then use that include file twice. And that is, at this point, because we've done so many things with these arrays, it's probably what we should have done. It probably would have saved time. It's just a little bit ugly. I don't know how I feel about it. It's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. It's really kind of abusing the macro, the preprocessor, but it does kind of work. And sometimes it's just better to have something that works, even if it's a little ugly, than something like this, which is kind of error-prone and manual. And I don't know how to really say much about those two, trade-offs there. But yeah, either way, it would be nice to have text macros for things like this if you do want to do them, but really they're also just a kind of a stupid thing, because you should never really have to do a text macro. Your language should have been able to handle that for you. Whatever you were doing with a text macro should have been something the language could have done, right? Because if it is that rote, if you can do effectively a programming operation on it, you should have just been able to tell your language to do it, whatever it was. And the fact that you happen to want to do it in actual text, maybe you want that option, but you should never have been forced to do so, right? Like, that's not something you should have to do. That's something that you should have the option of doing. And that's like, it's worth noting the difference between those two things. Anyway, so let's get category name from ID here. And I think this is what? Asset basic category. And so all I want to do here is say, look, I've got these like category tags, whatever those are. And we don't really know what they are just yet. But we've got these category tags, so we're going to go through here, and we're going to look at the category tags. And for every category tag that we see, if we find one that matches the ID that we're looking for, we will return it, right? And that's all we were going to do. So we've got this thing called a name tag, and we want, I don't know where that's defined. It's defined here. We want one of those for category as well. So we've got here category tag, I guess is what it is. And that's just going to be a basic asset or basic category, asset basic category. Yeah. That will allow us to scan through there and do this in HHA edit, so we can find that name, right? We'll be able to call that. So I'm going to do category here, and I'm going to say that, in fact, maybe we'll do like a none, something like this, or something like that. And then what I'm going to do in here, in fact, I guess what we could do is actually call it this way. So category tags, or category name from ID, we can start by just asking what's the none version, because that's what we will assume. And then in here, we would say, oh, the category actually comes out of this. So if we find the tag that has that particular thing in it, we'll go ahead and convert it, right? So the way we want to do that is to say if the tag type, in this particular case, right, happens to be equal to tag basic category, then we can do this, which is to say we will convert the value of the tag into a basic category and look up whatever that happens to be. We will then assume that that is our new category string, right? So in here we say the asset index, what we probably want to do then is say what type it is, I guess. So we would say something like category count category data. And then I think we're good to go. Oops, no commas. Forgot about those commas. Why can't we convert between those? That's really dumb. Like, that's how you would convert between those two things. How do you not know how to convert between a floating point value and an integer? Thanks, C++, for warnings that are completely useless. All right, so now if I redo these dumps, like if I redo that base game dump, what I'm hoping is that if I look at the assets now as a list, it'll tell me, yeah, like right off the bat, right, I can see what all of these are. And so looking through those, you know, it's pretty clear that there's nothing with an asset type of none in here, right? And that's all I wanted, was to get to the point where that was easier to see. So let's go ahead and redump the intro cutscene as well. Well, and the test fonts. And there we go. So now if I do a tab view on, let's say, the test fonts v2.txt, oops, w bonus pack, tab view. So all of these have font glyph, right? So all of those are correctly being loaded as well. So the last one that could be a problem is this one. Let's see what this has. All right, so, you know, we've clearly found our culprit. The intro cutscene HHA is just complete garbage. So we've got a problem. So it looks like we have it all. It looks like we either corrupted this file at some point, or it's just broken when we import plates, since all of these things are plates. I'm guessing what happened is it got corrupted at some point, like it rewrote an asset array like incorrectly or something. I'm not entirely sure, but what I do want to do is let's actually push forward a little bit on this. Let's go ahead and run this again with the plates deleted. So I'm gonna, you know, I guess make dir temp move intro cutscene dot star to temp, and so we put away that intro cutscene file, and now I'm gonna run. And by the way, this should never hit now. I'm going to run this again, and this should re-import like all of that stuff into the intro cutscene HHA. And what I want to do is, after that intro cutscene has like been saved, I want to then inspect what it looks like, right? And this is going to take a while because this is a debug build. So all of our importing will be very, very slow, right? And then we can export that text file and see what's up. This may take a while. Probably should have compiled in release mode for this, but it's almost done. I don't remember how big this file was. Maybe when I said almost done, that was a total lie. What was it, 300 meg file, I'll say? 300 meg file, you know, it's our intro cutscene assets uncompressed are just slightly smaller than, like, you know, the executable for Unreal Engine. All right, so that's got to be almost done, right? I mean, I think it was only in the 300 meg range for all the intro cutscene stuff, I think. Well, I guess we know how big it was, right? It was in the temp, yeah, 343. So it shouldn't be much bigger than that. It will now potentially have a little bit more in it because it's got the sound data, but that should be, I think, it. And then off it goes, right? So it looks like that's it. So let's take a look at what that actually wrote out in terms of information in the HHA. I'm going to do a rewrite of the intro cutscene text file, and then we're going to reload it here. So that's correct. Sort of. Yes. So that is exactly what we would expect to see. All of these are properly now labeled as plates. All of these are labeled as none, and the reason they're labeled as none is because they are like chained audio, right? So they're not supposed to get entered into any list. They're just a chain of this audio. Now, one could argue that we want to label these better, like, you know, it kind of is lame that these are not really identified anything other than the fact that they are a chain sound. Like, maybe they should have some kind of annotation on them. I don't know what we want to do about that. That's a tough call. I'm going to leave it like that for now, but, you know, in the future we may want to do something about that. I'm hoping now then, if we were to close this out, I'm hoping that now, if we were to rerun this, we would not have the bug that we had before. Well, I guess we will get this because these things are rightfully not added to any insertion as far as an asset type array is concerned. But I'm hoping that we wouldn't have that plate export conflict because that looked like some kind of a bug with the tag array. And it does look like we don't. So I'm going to call that done for now. This is sort of a standing issue. What should we do with this? And I don't know. Since these types are contiguous, the dump could just know that, right? If you have a chain sound, I'm kind of interested in how we're writing that out. Like, what is that 74, 6, 80, 95? x2. So do we actually write the entire sample count out and then the data chunk is just smaller? That's pretty interesting. I didn't know we were doing that. And I also don't know, is that what we should be doing? Like, should the sounds... just to show you what that is, right? Inside the file format, where we write out the sounds, there's a sample count, a channel count, and a chain, piece of chain information there, right? Now, you don't need to know the sample count because the data size, right, the thing that actually says in here how big the data is, tells you what you need to know about the sound. So these two pieces of information are actually completely useless and don't mean anything, right? In fact, the channel count is actually just a lie because we don't actually bother with multi-channel sounds anymore. We split them into separate assets. So we could literally remove both of those things from the sound footprint and be fine. We just don't at the moment, right? So I don't really know what we want to do there. I don't know. Maybe it makes sense to store that sample count redundantly just so we can look and see, well, how long is this thing going to play for? So we don't have to chase the chain to know how long it would be in total. I'm going to say that let's leave it this way for now. And that channel count as well, because that would let you know how many there are. So I'm going to say like we accidentally did the right thing there, and I'm just going to say that's fine. Moving forward, I might document this though, like... So really, this is not true anymore. This is the data, and we're just saying that is, you know, you don't get to interleave by that. So, so I think that's fine. That means we're actually going to use that full U32. This is pointless. Definitely doesn't need to do that. I guess so. I maybe was premature. If we just apply this to do just to the stuff below it, like this, then it's still accurate. I'm going to go ahead and say that's fine. Let me do this and see if we can still run. So I think we're okay now. Looks like we got rid of that issue. I'm hoping that this will now work for sound importing, but we still probably have a little bit of debugging to do later. However, I think we are now properly implementing streaming sounds in the asset import, and we should be good to go. All right, we'll go to a brief Q&A, but I think that's everything. Let me go ahead and... There we go. I've read the SQL. No, it doesn't support that flag. Only Git supports, you know, the high-powered hermeneutics graph traversal. Any cues? So interesting enough, Twitch says we have 90 out of 125 sub points, but I don't actually know what we get if we have 125 sub points. They never really make it clear like what you get for getting more points. Is it just more emotes? Okay, so it looks like we could add like a lot more emotes now. Uh, Wait, okay, hold on a second. Get 125 subscriber points and you get one new emote slot? But we've got so many. There's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more emote slots that we can fill out. Right? I just do not understand. I will forever be confused by the Twitch emotes stuff. Um all right, so we have a couple questions now. While I was looking to figure out how the Twitch emotes work, I think this means we can add more Twitch emotes, but I don't really know if that's true. The questions were: you never went to university, but you seem to be very literate in mathematics. How do you get to this level? So I guess what I would say is I'm not that literate in mathematics. I do think that going to university is somewhat helpful for mathematics because um, it you kind of have a forced, clearly laid out set of time to go through all of several sets of math. I guess what I'd say is the way I compensate for not having gone through that is I just did a lot of that on my own. So I would just work my way through books as necessary. So I learned I learned interval arithmetic from a book. I learned linear algebra from a book. Um, I learned matrix, like sparse matrix analysis and stuff like that from a book. But like I've never really worked through like hardcore calculus stuff, and so my calc is very weak. Like you know, I understand conceptually what like Stokes theorem or Green's theorem do. Um, I understand conceptually what calculus of variations does, but I can't really do it, right? I understand partial differential equations to a certain extent, but like my ability to actually work with them is poor. The same would be true of like ordinary differential equations. And so a lot of those things are just a case of spending the time to like actually just work through them. They're like everything else, you know, you just have to practice with them and start to put them into your head in a way that makes sense to you. And I don't really have any advice about how to do that. A lot of math books are terrible. Most math books are terrible, so finding the right math book can be a big help. But other than that, it's really just setting aside the time to actually study and work through it on your own. Try to pick some code to write also, so you get used to like applying a piece of, you know, if you take something like Stokes' theorem or Green's theorem or ordinary differential equations or partial differential equations, there's all sorts of code you could write that use those sorts of things. And so you can easily come up with little exercises to do that would help you internalize what you're actually doing, like how you actually apply those pieces of math to something useful. And so you will make like a stronger connection to what they actually do as opposed to just the theoretical, like I know it manipulates the symbols in this particular way, right? So what I would say is, you know, just spend the time. That's really all it is. And beyond that, try to get good recommendations for books that are actually good. That's really all I can recommend. It's really spending the time. It's the same as programming. It's spending the time. Piplo says, I got a call from Gary Walsh, Selena Meyer's bagman. While you were unpacking the backpack, he said he's jealous and wants to compare bag layouts. I have no idea who those people are. What are your thoughts on code introspection or adding metadata to things like structs? Useful or yet another bad object-oriented idea? No, I think they're very useful. I don't think they have anything to do with object-oriented programming. I think they're just good. There's nothing magic about a struct or a class. It's just a way of assigning a name to a particular layout of data in memory. There's no reason why you shouldn't be able to access that layout conceptually in your code. The fact that C++ doesn't allow this is terrible. They're finally adding that in like C++ 2037 or whatever they're up to at this point. Or at least my understanding is it'll probably be complete crap like all of their features are. But like at least they're adding some crappy version, I guess. I am 100% in favor of languages that actually do this well, though. It's very good. I guess is what I'd say, and has nothing to do with object-oriented programming. Favorite code design learning resources? I don't know. Would you use your from scratch level approach for machine learning or just use a library like TensorFlow? I really couldn't tell you because I've never looked at machine learning libraries before. Some of the problems that you'll have with like from scratch in any domain where you're probably talking about using GPU or other HPC stuff is just that you're going to need some way to access the custom hardware for it. And so unlike situations where I would recommend learning to do things at a low level from the start, there are some domains, and special purpose hardware programming is unfortunately increasingly one of them, where that's really not an option. Like, there's no way to directly program an NVIDIA card. It just simply doesn't exist. So you are forced to use some kind of a library, right, in order to access it. And so, you know, while I would say that understanding what's going on is still crucial, just like it is everywhere, even when you use a library, and I would encourage you to figure out how machine learning is working at a lower level for whatever the particular thing is that you're working on, using a library, whether it's TensorFlow or something else, may be unavoidable because you may need, I mean, NVIDIA and Apple and various other hardware manufacturers put specific machine learning uh, what do I want to put this? Part of the die is dedicated to, doing a crap ton of large, low precision matrix multiplies, for lack of a better term, right? Which are specifically for doing things like machine learning via neural networks. And so if you're trying to target that sort of thing, you kind of have to use some API that allows you to access that stuff. And so maybe TensorFlow is a good choice. I have no idea. I've never even looked at it. But, if you're doing stuff that requires special purpose hardware, you oftentimes don't have the option of programming it yourself. So it's not really the same kind of question as it would be for something like what we do on Handmade Hero. And you can see us doing exactly this on Handmade Hero too, right? We have to use, for example, shaders to program the 3D hardware. We don't have the ability to program it at any real lower level than that. You could try and write in like pseudo assembly, but even that's not really the assembly language of the shader, right? It's of the shading hardware. It's actually sort of a translation layer. So, that's just the unfortunate world we live in. I wish we didn't, but, I also can't answer any questions about DRIM GUI. I've never used it. You could ask George. Remedy BG is using it. He might have an opinion. So X13 Pixels on the chat, he might have something to say about that. And no, I don't really have any book recommendations for programming or math these days because I'm kind of woefully out of date. The math books that I learned math from and the programming books I read as a child are, probably not the right ones to. I hope they're not I hope there's better resources now, I guess is what I'm saying. If really nothing better than the books I read have been written in the last 30 years, that's kind of sad. I guess I'm technically not an exclusively C++ guy. I guess I have used a couple other languages, although I wouldn't really say that I've ever done enough work in those languages. Well, that's not true. So I wrote a fair bit of PHP code for web development back in 2006-7 timeframe, maybe 8, something around there. It's a horrible language. Don't ever use it. That's the only thing I have to say. I don't think I've really had much experience. Well, Pascal I used before I did C, and also like Basic and True Basic. I wrote a significant amount of code in. But that's about it. I haven't ever used like C# or Python. Trying to think of any other languages that come to mind. Swift, that people have been using lately. I've never programmed a significant amount in those languages. Not like I haven't done a significant project like in those languages. So I'm not really in a position to comment on them extensively. You know what I'm saying? What's your favorite fairly new language? I don't really have one because I haven't really used any. I haven't used fairly new language. I haven't used Rust. I haven't used JAI yet. I don't know what other fairly new languages there are that people. Well, Swift, I guess. I haven't used those languages, so I haven't. I can't pick a favorite language because I have no idea what they're like. What's your impression of Seattle after living there for as long as you have? I think it's not like I wouldn't live here now if I had a choice. Like I quite liked it in the 90s, late 90s. I moved here in 95. I would say probably even up through like 2010 era. I thought it was quite nice. The past couple years, it's really gone downhill considerably. Um, it's a very poorly run city, to say the very least. Uh, and you know, some aspects are not necessarily the city's fault. Some of them maybe you could consider to be federal problems. But a fair bit of it's just city fault as well. And I would say, yeah, it's not a place to move to. You know, I'd probably be gone by now if I wasn't right in the middle of a bunch of stuff, and you know, I don't want to be spending a lot of money and stuff like that. But you know, when I'm done with projects, I wouldn't be surprised if I'm out of here. Come back to Boston. Yeah, you know, I guess I could. Um, I haven't really spent much time in Boston, so I don't really know what I would think of it. Uh, I I'm not, you know, one of the problems of moving out of Washington State is like we're a company, you know, and I feel like that would mean we'd have to change like accountants and stuff for tax filing, because I'm doubting that our accountants here would file like Massachusetts has its own state income tax. I don't know if there's a city income tax in Boston, but there's at least a state income tax in Massachusetts, and you know they probably don't work with that. I would assume. I don't really know though. If given a virtually infinite budget, what would you dedicate your time to? I would probably be doing basically what I'm doing now. You know, I just would be a lot less stressed all the time. If that makes sense. Um, so Insobot just like, can somebody please clip what Insobot just said? That's amazing. Insobot just said it's still Valve. That's very, very good. That's very, very good. Insobot is truly a national treasure. And I guess he's not really a national treasure because I think he was made outside the US. He's an international treasure. Might be the way to say it. No one ever says international treasure. Um, all right, I think I've gotten through all the questions probably, it looks like. Victorn, just in case you just kind of quickly uh, joined us here, we switched to X13 Pixels Debugger, and it's working real well. You can actually find a link to it in down below the Twitch window there. It's remedybg.itch.io. $20, and it's pretty darn good, even though it's just kind of getting started. It's on version 0.2, but you know it's already given Visual Studio a run for its money, and I think pretty soon it's going to be kind of game over for Visual Studio as a debugger, which is pretty awesome because I'm so sick and tired of Visual Studio. All right. We don't need this right now. There we go. Thank you everyone for joining me for another episode of Handmade Hero. It's been a pleasure coding with you as always. If you would like to follow along the series at home, you can always pre-order the game on handmadehero.org, and it comes with the source code so you can follow along and do your own experiments. We are ostensibly done importing audio. I mean, we don't really know, but we went through the code and it appears to do what I wanted it to do, so that means next week we should be able to just put that into actual use. Add some sound to the game. Of course, we don't really have many sounds out of the game, but we've got some tests at least, so we can at least verify that those are working properly. Hey, maybe that means we should figure out where we're going to get some sounds for this game. That's sort of another issue altogether, but we'll take a look. I'll be back here next week to do exactly that. Until then, everyone have fun programming, and I'll see you on the internet. Take it easy, everybody.